All aboard. Finally, Wednesday, April 10th arrived. The crew members were all expected to be on board by 6 a.m. to attend an 8 a.m. muster and to be sure that the ship would be ready to receive the passengers, most of whom would be coming down from London by boat train. The earliest to arrive were the second and third class passengers who had taken the 7:30 train from Waterloo Station. There was nearly 500 people traveling third class and around 240 booked into second class. Many of the third-class passengers were immigrants from Scandinavia who had crossed the North Sea on other ships. Some were single men off to seek their fortunes, others were wives and children joining husbands who had already settled in the New World. Often whole families were traveling together with one aim to escape poverty in their homeland and to find something better in America or Canada. Many would have saved for months or even years to raise the price of their tickets. These passengers would have made their way up the third-class gangway to be briefly checked over by a team of doctors who were particularly on the lookout for trachoma, a very infectious eye disease. No one with trachoma would be allowed into the United States, and anyone showing symptoms would be immediately turned off the ship. Everyone else was quickly directed to the sleeping quarters by the third-class stewards. The second-class passengers, meanwhile, came on board by a different gangway and made their way to the purser's office, from where they were directed to their staterooms. First-class passengers had much more leisurely time. Their boat train did not arrive until 11:30, just half an hour before the Titanic was due to set sail. Although many would have sent their luggage and servants in advance, nearly 200 first-class passengers embarked in Southampton. Many were wealthy Americans returning from vacations or business trips to Europe. So there's some of the first-class people on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, you see the third-class people and the second-class people. Setting sail at 12 o'clock sharp, the ship was ready to leave. At the first gangway was away 8 firemen who had signed on a crew, had been sneaked off to a pub, came dashing up. 3 of them made it on board, while the others waited for a passenger train to go in front of them. By the time the other 5 got to the dockside, the officer guarding the gangway had decided that they were too late to be let on the ship. After arguing for a while, the seamen turned away, having just missed out on 2 weeks' paid work. The Titanic sounded a long blast of her whistle, and the Southampton tugboats pulled and pushed her away from the dockside, guided by the harbor pilot, George Bower. Finally, she was off. She was making her way slowly down the narrow channel toward the open sea, where there was a sudden flurry of excitement. The movement of water created by her passing made a much smaller liner. The New York break her moorings and start drifting right into the path of the bigger ship. Quick action by the captain of one of the tugs and by Captain Smith and George Bower, who put the Titanic's engines immediately into reverse, saved the day. The 2 liners missed each other by scarcely more than a few feet. Cherbourg, France. There were no other mishaps, and soon the Titanic was in the English Channel, streaming toward Cherbourg, her first port of call. She arrived there at 6:30 in the evening, a couple of hours later than planned, thanks largely to the incident with the New York. The ship dropped anchor offshore to be met by 2 White Star tenders, small feeder boats specially designed for carrying passengers, freight, and mail to and from the dock. 22 passengers were making the short journey from Southampton to Cherbourg. Disembarked. While they were leaving, 274 new passengers came on board, 142 first class, 30 second class, and 102 third class. They had arrived in Cherbourg on the train Transatlantic, special boat train that had left Paris that morning. The third class passengers were a mix of nationalities, many of the eastern Mediterranean or the Near East, including Croatians, Syrians, and Armenians. With all the passengers safely stowed, the Titanic weighed anchor just after 8 p.m. and set off once more. Queenstown, Ireland. At 11:30 the next morning, the Titanic stopped about 2 miles off of Queenstown in Ireland to pick up the Irish mail and her last remaining passengers, a handful traveling to New York second class and just over 100 immigrants in third class. At the same time, one crew member, John Godfrey, jumped ship, and 7 passengers who had booked fares from Southampton to Queenstown disembarked. One of them was Francis Brown, an amateur photographer who had spent much of his time on board taking pictures of the new ship. Into the Atlantic at 1:30 on the afternoon of Thursday, April 11, the Titanic headed out into the Atlantic, expected to arrive in New York on the morning of Wednesday, April 17th. She was far from full, but even so was carrying more than 2,000 people. Things seemed to have quickly settled down on board. The weather was good, and many passengers were apparently very impressed in how smooth running the Titanic was. Those on the higher decks could hardly feel the vibrations of her enormous engines. There were a few glitches, of course. There was a smoldering fire in one of the coal bunkers, not finally put out until Saturday morning, and up in the crow's nest the binoculars used by the lookouts were missing. They had apparently been there in their special locker when the ship had left Belfast, but now they were gone. Nobody knew where. Okay, so why did the lookout crew need binoculars? And how important do you think this equipment might be?